Hello, everyone, and thank you for choosing to listen to this story. Welcome to Part 3, the finale of this series, The Villain Who Falls in Love with the Dead Prince. If you haven't listened to Parts 1 and 2 yet, I highly recommend starting there first to fully experience the journey and understand the story. Thank you for being here, and without further ado, let's begin.
Chapter 10. The Soul That Never Returned. Several months passed after that night Hector had his breakdown. The kingdom continued prospering. The scars left by decades of corruption slowly healed. By all appearances, Hector Aurelius stood at the peak of his life. Yet every night, when the palace finally became quiet and no one remained to witness the king's loneliness, Hector always found himself returning to the same place. The hidden room, the garden, the recording crystal, and Adrian. Always, Adrian. It happened on an ordinary evening, a rainy evening, the sort of evening where the entire palace seemed half asleep. Hector sat inside the hidden room, reviewing several ancient magical texts recovered during his campaign against Cashin. Most were useless and incomplete. Some were outright nonsense written by scholars who clearly enjoyed inventing theories. Then one particular manuscript caught his attention, not because of its title, but because of a familiar symbol drawn in its corner. A symbol Hector had seen before, inside Adrian's notes. His expression immediately sharpened as his eyes raced across the text before he abruptly froze, staring at the page in stunned silence. Rain tapped softly against the window. The room became deathly silent, because the text described something impossible, a forbidden curse from the ancient era, a curse lost to history, a curse known as soul severance. According to the manuscript, soul severance was considered one of the most horrifying magical techniques ever created, not because it destroyed the body or inflicted pain, but because it targeted the soul itself. The victim's soul would be forcibly separated from the body. To outside observers, the victim simply appeared dead. Their body would slowly fail, and life force would disappear. And eventually the soul itself would dissolve. Permanent, absolute, irreversible. The ancient mages who created it considered it worse than death, because even resurrection magic could not restore someone whose soul no longer remained attached. Hector felt cold as he continued reading, because the symptoms described by the manuscript matched Adrian's poisoning perfectly. Every detail: the coma, the internal damage, the failure of healing magic, the inevitable death. Everything. The poison was never a poison. It had merely been a delivery method, a vessel. The real weapon had been the curse hidden inside it. Hector immediately stood, books scattered across the floor. He searched through Adrian's old research notes. Hours passed. The deeper he searched, the more horrifying the truth became. Adrian had already discovered this years ago, long before the assassination attempt, while researching ancient magical ruins, while translating forbidden texts, while studying lost magical civilizations. Adrian had uncovered fragments regarding soul severance, enough to recognize it, enough to understand it, enough to prepare for it. Hector's hands trembled slightly as he found a particular journal, one Adrian had never finished. Inside it was a single passage, written in haste, written shortly before the poisoning. If I am correct, there exists a method to survive soul severance. Hector's eyes widened. He continued reading. The ritual remains incomplete. The theoretical success rate is unknown, but it should preserve soul continuity. The greatest danger would occur if the body becomes occupied before reconnection. The room became silent. Hector stared at the sentence several times in disbelief. His heartbeat began accelerating, because suddenly everything made sense. The night Adrian was poisoned, he had not waited helplessly for his inevitable death. He had fought, in his own way, using knowledge nobody else possessed. He had activated an unfinished ancient ritual, a forbidden emergency technique. Instead of allowing the curse to tear apart his soul, Adrian had voluntarily separated himself. A controlled severance, a temporary departure. His soul should have remained connected to his body through a spiritual tether. Then, after the curse finished its work, he should have returned. The plan was brilliant, dangerous, but brilliant. Exactly the sort of thing Adrian would do. And according to every note Hector found, the ritual had worked. The problem came afterward. At the exact moment Adrian's soul left his body, a foreign soul entered. Hector Carmine. Hector slowly sat down, unable to process what he was reading. The room felt strangely small, the air strangely heavy, because for the first time since arriving in this world, he understood what had happened. Neither of them had failed. The ritual succeeded. The transmigration succeeded. Two impossible situations simply happened at the same moment. Two miracles colliding, creating a disaster. Adrian's soul attempted to return, only to find the body already occupied. A vessel could not hold two souls. The body already had an owner, Hector, and because of that, Adrian never returned. Not because he died, not because the ritual failed, not because he disappeared, but because he couldn't come back. For several minutes, Hector remained motionless, then slowly lowered his head. A bitter laugh escaped him. Of course this would happen. His entire life had been absurd. Why would this be different? The man he loved and mourned for, the man he believed lost forever, was not dead. And somehow that revelation hurt even more, because now a question existed. A terrible question, one he couldn't stop asking. Where's Adrian? That night, Hector didn't sleep. He searched every note, manuscript, journal, ancient record, everything he acquired. By dawn, he discovered one final piece of information, a horrifying possibility. When a soul failed to return after soul severance, it did not necessarily dissipate, not immediately. Some records suggested that the soul could remain trapped between planes, neither alive nor dead, unable to move on or return, simply waiting. For years, sometimes centuries, the ancient scholars called it the silent shore, a place between existence and oblivion, where abandoned souls drifted endlessly, waiting for something impossible, a path to home. The thought nearly broke Hector, because all Hector could imagine was Adrian, alone, waiting, believing he had failed, believing his kingdom was gone, believing nobody was looking for him, not knowing that someone had spent years loving him, not knowing that someone had spent years wishing for the chance to meet him, not knowing that someone would gladly tear apart heaven, hell, and every realm in existence just to bring him back. For the first time since arriving in this world, Hector cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears, falling one after another, because suddenly every dream became cruel, every smile became painful, every recording became unbearable. Adrian was not gone. He was somewhere, and Hector could not reach him. Near sunrise, Hector returned to the hidden room. The first rays of dawn illuminated the flowers outside. The recording crystal rested quietly on the table. Hector activated it. Adrian appeared once more, laughing, arguing with flower fairies, smiling, living, beautiful. Hector reached toward the image, not expecting an answer, not expecting anything. Yet his voice came out steady, filled with a determination that once terrified continents. Wait for me. The recording continued playing. Adrian laughed at something a fairy said, completely unaware and unreachable. Yet Hector continued anyway, his voice softer now, more vulnerable than any king should ever sound. Just a little longer. A faint smile appeared, painful, hopeful, desperate. Wait for me, Adrian. I'll find you. No matter how many ancient ruins he had to explore, no matter how many forbidden realms he had to enter, or impossible laws of magic he had to break, the king of the underworld had once conquered an entire criminal empire. The king of Aurelius had rebuilt a nation, and now Hector Carmine had finally found something worth fighting for more than either. Not power, not revenge, not kingdoms. Adrian, his Adrian. And for the first time in years, the story was no longer about revenge anymore. It was about a rescue. Chapter 11. The Voice Beyond the Veil. After discovering the truth about soul severance, Hector threw himself into research with an obsession that alarmed even his closest advisors. Ancient ruins, forbidden libraries, lost magical records, abandoned temples. Anything that might contain even a single clue about the Silent Shore became his target. The kingdom assumed their king was pursuing magical advancements for the nation. Only Hector knew the truth. He was searching for one person, one soul, one impossible hope. Adrian. Months passed, yet no matter how deeply he searched, the answers remained frustratingly incomplete. And then, strange things began happening. Small things, insignificant things, things nobody except Hector would ever notice. One morning, Hector entered his office and immediately froze. A book rested on his desk, an old magical theory text. His eyes narrowed. He distinctly remembered placing inside his private study the previous night, on the third shelf, behind several records. Nobody had access to that room, yet somehow the book sat neatly atop his desk, open to a bookmark page. Hector spent nearly 10 minutes staring at it, then another 10 minutes searching the palace for intruders. He found none. Then came the letters. That was when Hector truly began losing his mind. At least that's what he initially believed. One evening, he sat inside the hidden room writing reports. Halfway through a draft, he paused to retrieve another document. When he returned, something felt wrong. His eyes lowered toward the paper. A new sentence appeared beneath his writing, a sentence he absolutely had not written. His heartbeat immediately accelerated. The handwriting was elegant, beautiful, familiar, painfully familiar, because it perfectly matched Adrian's journals. The message consisted of only 6 words. Don't forget to water the roses. Hector stared at it, then continued staring. An hour later, he was still staring. Later that day, the roses were watered, very thoroughly, possibly too thoroughly. 3 unfortunate flower fairies later complained that Hector nearly drowned them. He ignored their complaints, because his attention remained fixed upon one fact. Someone had written that message, and it wasn't him. Weeks passed before another appeared, this time inside a private letter. A letter he had locked away, a letter nobody could access, but somehow gained an additional sentence overnight. The yellow flowers are still my favorite. Hector nearly stopped breathing, then immediately locked himself inside the hidden room, then reread the sentence 43 times. Not that he counted. He absolutely counted. The incidents continued. Never enough to prove anything. Never enough to dismiss. A moved object. A written note. A flower blooming where none had existed before. A cup of tea appearing on days Hector forgot to eat. At first he suspected magic. Then spirits. Then madness. By the 2nd year after his coronation, he had exhausted every logical explanation. None fit. And secretly, deep inside, a ridiculous hope began forming. One he refused to acknowledge, or rather feared acknowledging, because if he was wrong, it would destroy him. The first true contact happened on a quiet autumn night. The palace slept. The kingdom slept. Even the moon seemed reluctant to disturb the silence. Hector sat alone inside the hidden room. The recording crystal illuminated the darkness. Adrian's laughter echoed softly through the chamber. The same recording. Again, for perhaps the 1,000th time. Maybe more. Hector had stopped counting long ago. The crystal showed Adrian arguing with several flower fairies, then laughed so hard he nearly dropped the crystal. Hector smiled despite himself. Then a voice spoke behind him, amused, soft, gentle. You've watched that recording far too many times, Hector. The crystal slipped from Hector's hand and shattered against the floor. For the first time in either of his lives, the king of the underworld was terrified, not of enemies, death, or war. Terrified because he knew that voice. Impossible, yet familiar. His entire body froze. Slowly, painfully slowly, Hector turned around and forgot how to breathe. Moonlight poured through the windows. Silver light bathed the room, and standing within it was Adrian. Not flesh, not entirely. His figure appeared translucent, like moonlight given shape, like a dream refusing to fade, like something too beautiful to belong to reality. Long silver hair, sapphire eyes, the gentle expression Hector had imagined thousands of times. Yet reality once again surpassed imagination. Adrian stood there looking slightly embarrassed and slightly amused, as though he wasn't currently destroying Hector's entire understanding of existence. For several seconds, neither spoke. Hector couldn't. His mind had stopped functioning, because he had spent years of mourning, years of longing, years of searching, years of convincing himself that he would never see Adrian, that he would never hear his voice, never look into his eyes, never have the chance to say all the things trapped inside his heart. He had accepted it, learned to live with it, built walls around it, buried it beneath responsibilities, kingdoms, politics, duty, and now, Adrian stood before him. Every wall collapsed instantly. Neither moved, neither looked away. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, nor awkward, simply overwhelming. Adrian was the first to break it. "You look different than I imagined." Hector almost laughed, or cried, possibly both. His voice emerged rough, unsteady, a voice nobody in the kingdom or in his past world had ever heard. "You imagine me?" Adrian smiled softly, and Hector's heart immediately surrendered. "Again, I've had a very long time to imagine things." The answer struck deeper than any blade, because suddenly Hector remembered the silent shore, the waiting, the loneliness, the years, all those years, alone, and for the first time Adrian's smile faltered, only slightly, but enough for Hector to see the exhaustion hidden beneath it, enough to see the loneliness, enough to understand. Neither of them had escaped suffering. They had simply suffered apart. For years, staring at one another now felt almost unbearable, because they were finally here, finally real, finally together, and neither knew where to begin. After everything, after all those years, after all that longing, the first thing Hector managed to say was, the roses are doing well." A stunned silence followed. Then Adrian blinked, then laughed, a genuine laugh, bright, warm, beautiful, exactly like the recording. Or not, because for Hector, Adrian's laugh looks more ethereal in person. And Hector immediately decided that if the heavens themselves tried to separate them again, he would personally wage war against the heavens. Chapter 12. The Man Who Saw Adrian. For several minutes after Adrian's appearance, neither of them moved. The shattered recording crystal remained forgotten upon the floor, while moonlight bathed the room in silver, and the flowers outside swayed gently beneath the night breeze. For the first time in years, Adrian and Hector stood before one another, not as memories, dreams, or the product of longing, but as two people finally sharing the same moment. Well, almost. Adrian's form still shimmered like a reflection upon water, translucent and occasionally flickering, but to Hector, none of that mattered. Adrian was here, and that alone made Hector question whether he had fallen asleep somewhere and was simply dreaming. Eventually, Adrian broke the silence. "You really watched that recording an unhealthy number of times." Hector immediately looked away. "It wasn't unhealthy." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Hector, you practically memorized every second of it." It was extensive observation, a fascinating term for repeatedly watching the same recording. Hector folded his arms. "It was research." Adrian laughed softly. "Of course it was." The sound echoed through the room. Hector immediately came to a terrifying conclusion. Hearing Adrian laugh in person was significantly more dangerous than hearing it through the crystal, because now he understood why the flower fairies had never left Adrian alone. The little pests had clearly become addicted. The following weeks became strange in the most wonderful way. Adrian's manifestations varied unpredictably. Some days he could remain for only minutes, while on others he stayed for entire nights. Neither understood why. But as Hector continued researching soul magic in the silent shore, Adrian's form gradually became more stable, as though he was following a distant light back home. One evening, Hector sat inside the hidden garden reading reports while Adrian floated around him. "Hector." "Yes." "I think I've forgotten how walking works." Hector lowered his papers. "That sounds concerning." Well, I haven't touched the ground in 3 years. And you're smiling, Hector questioned. Watching you suffer over it is amusing, Adrian said with a childlike enthusiasm. You become troublesome. Hector shook his head in disbelief. Adrian grinned. I learn from watching you. Hector closed his eyes. My own methods are being used against me. What a terrible tragedy. After that, both fell into a comfortable silence with a smile adorning their face. Both were enjoying the evening breeze until Adrian broke the silence. "Oh, right," Adrian suddenly exclaimed, as though he had just remembered something important. A mischievous smile slowly appeared on his face. Before Hector could become suspicious, Adrian casually went closer and asked, "Would you like to explain the mirror incident?" Hector nearly died. The silence that followed could have frozen an entire kingdom. Slowly, Hector turned his head toward Adrian. Adrian looked entirely innocent, which only made him more suspicious. "You saw that?" Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Perhaps a little." Hector narrowed his eyes. "You saw more than a little, didn't you?" Adrian's smile widened. "I might have stayed longer than necessary." Hector stared. "You saw the entire thing?" Adrian thoughtfully tapped his chin. It would be considered rude to leave halfway through. Hector covered his face. Immediately, without hesitation, without dignity, without any intention of recovering. Adrian laughed seeing Hector's action, the kind of laughter that made his shoulders shake and tears gather at the corners of his eyes, which somehow made the situation even worse. "Please tell me you didn't see everything." Adrian thought about it seriously for a moment. Then he smiled, a soft smile, a devastating smile, the smile that had ruined Hector's life several times already. "I saw enough." Hector wanted the earth to open beneath him. Perhaps a dragon would descend from the heavens and devour him. Perhaps an assassin had finally found him. Perhaps divine punishment existed after all. Anything at all. Instead, he remained seated while Adrian watched it with unconcealed amusement. Still smiling at him, Hector slowly lowered his hands and looked at the ceiling. "I have conquered empires, destroyed criminal organizations, ended wars, outplayed a monster who controlled half the continent." He turned toward Adrian with the expression of a defeated man. "And none of those experiences prepared me for this." Adrian blinked innocently. "For what?" "For surviving after man I love witnessed me trying to romance his reflection." Adrian froze. Then his ears slowly turned red. The truth was that Adrian knew everything. Not merely the mirror incident, the letters, the conversations spoken into empty air, the recordings, the promises, the years Hector spent searching ancient ruins and chasing impossible hopes. Every moment of grief, every moment of love. At first, Hector thought Adrian would feel burdened. Instead, Adrian simply became quiet, treating those memories with gentleness that almost frightened him. One night, Hector finally asked a question that had haunted him. "Why aren't you angry, Adrian?" Adrian blinked. "Angry?" Adrian asked, confused at the unexpected question. "You know how I feel, Adrian." The words came with difficulty. "You know everything. But why are you not angry or feel disgusted at me and my feelings?" Adrian gazed at the fireflies dancing among the flowers. "When I was alive," he said softly, then laughed at the absurdity of the phrase. "That's a strange sentence." Neither commented on it. Then he continued. "When I was alive, the knights respected me. The people loved me. The kingdom trusted me. Everyone saw the crown prince, the hero, the future king." His smile became faint. But nobody looked close enough to find Adrian. There was no bitterness in his voice, only honesty. He looked down at his transparent fingers. "Do you know something funny?" "What?" "The flower fairies knew more about me than most nobles." Hector snorted. Actually snorted. Adrian looked extremely pleased with himself. Then his expression softened. "But you saw me. The real me." The words almost stole Hector's breath. "You saw the boy who wrote letters to his mother. You saw the child crying alone in his room. You saw the young man pretending to be stronger than he really was. You saw the boy who talked to flowers and foolishly arguing with fairies. His sapphire eyes held an emotion Hector had never seen before. You mourned him. You cherished him. And before I met you, Hector, I never realized how lonely I truly was. You understood me without ever meeting me. His voice became softer. And before you, I never imagined someone could love me simply because I was Adrian. Hector forgot to breathe. And that's unfair, truly unfair. Adrian continued with a small laugh. Because now I don't know what to do. Hector blinked. What? Adrian looked away. His ears had become red. Because somewhere along the way, when I watched you talking to me in an empty room, writing letters you would never send, and loving someone you believed you would never meet, I realized something frightening. Hector looked up. I had begun looking forward to seeing you, just as much as you waited for me. I had started waiting for your voice. Adrian smiled warmly. I started looking forward to seeing you, and was disappointed whenever I couldn't appear before you. I wanted to see your expressions. I wanted to laugh with you. I started becoming happy because you were happy. And one day I realized, Adrian laughed softly, I had fallen in love with the man who loved me before he ever met me. Adrian's soft gaze met Hector's wide, surprised eye. I fell in love with you. Hector stopped breathing. Completely. Adrian immediately became flustered. Say something. Hector? Hector? Are you alive? Adrian laughed softly. The former king of the underworld stared blankly. No, no, no. I cannot survive this. Then buried his face in both hands. Adrian burst out laughing. Hector, why are you acting like this? What do you mean, why? You confessed. And then you smiled. How am I supposed to survive? Hector, you fought wars. I preferred wars. Adrian laughed harder. Hector looked utterly defeated. You can't say something like that so calmly. And why not? Because I've imagined hearing those words for years. Adrian's cheeks turned red. I know. That isn't helping. It wasn't meant to. Their laughter echoed through the garden, and for the first time in their lives, neither of them felt lonely. Days passed, and they fell into a comfortable routine. Adrian had somehow developed a habit of floating upside down from tree branches. You look ridiculous. You are just jealous, because I can ignore gravity. I conquered criminal empires. And yet gravity still controls you, Adrian retorted back. Hector stared in silence, not able to conclude whether to laugh or cry over the absurdity of their conversation. Another time, Hector discovered 17 notes throughout his office. Eat properly. You are a king. Kings require food. This is not a negotiation. The final note read, I asked the flower fairies to monitor you. Unfortunately, the flower fairies took their assignment very seriously. One diplomatic meeting was interrupted when a tiny fairy flew into the room carrying a sandwich. The ambassadors froze. The ministers froze. The fairy shoved the sandwich into Hector's face. Adrian says you're forgetting lunch again. Across the room, Adrian was laughing so hard, he nearly became transparent. The nights became their favorite hours. No ministers, no court, no kingdom, just the two of them beneath the stars. Sometimes they spoke of childhood dreams, sometimes regrets, sometimes nothing at all. One night beside the pond, Adrian smiled. If we had met as children, I think you would have been a terrible influence. Hector looked offended. I would have taught you strategy. It would have been crime. It would have been elegant strategy. It would have been crime with better vocabulary. They laughed together until tears formed in their eyes. Eventually, Hector looked toward the stars. We would have been friends. Adrian smiled softly. No. Hector blinked at the reply. We would have become important to each other. Adrian continued. His voice grew quiet. I think We would have found each other anyway. The air stilled. Their eyes met, and somewhere among the flowers, several fairies immediately fled, because even they understood what was happening. Not the danger of wars, not the danger of kingdoms, but something far more terrifying. Two hopelessly devoted idiots had finally fallen in love. Neither of them regretted it, and had begun choosing each other. One day, one smile, and one conversation at a time. Chapter 13. The Bonded Souls. The first time it happened, both of them thought it was an accident. One evening, Adrian appeared unusually quiet. Not sad, not troubled, simply different, and Hector noticed immediately. Of course he did. No matter how many reports occupied his desk, no matter how complicated the kingdom's affairs became, Hector had somehow developed the terrifying ability to recognize even the slightest change in Adrian's mood. "You've been suspiciously silent for the past 20 minutes, Hector remarked without lifting his eyes from the documents in front of him. "And before you deny it, your habit of floating upside down from tree branches when you're troubled doesn't count as subtle." Adrian, who had indeed been hanging upside down from a branch above him, looked offended. "Perhaps I simply enjoy defying gravity. You look like an abandoned bat. That was unnecessarily cruel. Then stop looking like wildlife." Adrian laughed softly, but a moment later, he turned away, and suddenly, Hector felt it. Warmth, affection, embarrassment, a strange tenderness. Not his own, Adrian's. Adrian froze. Hector froze. Both slowly turned toward each other, and Adrian's ears became red. Did you felt that too?" Hector blinked. Yes, I did," Hector replied with an astonishing smile growing on his face. Immediately, Adrian covered his face with both hands. "Hector, yes. Would you kindly stop smiling? You are embarrassed." Hector teased Adrian. "I am painfully aware of that. And adorable." Adrian lowered his hands slowly. "Excuse me." Hector's smile widened. "You heard me?" Adrian stared, then smiled. A dangerous smile. The kind Hector had learned to fear. My, His Majesty has become bold." Hector immediately regretted existing, because the embarrassment crossing through their bond suddenly doubled. Adrian burst into laughter. "Wonderful. Now we're both suffering." That night marked the beginning of something neither of them had expected. At first, they thought nothing of it, until Hector suddenly felt warmth and affection blooming inside his chest, while Adrian sat several steps away, smiling absent-mindedly at a flower. And moments later, Adrian nearly buried his face in his hands when a wave of embarrassment that clearly did not belong to him flooded his mind. Only then did they realize something strange. Their thoughts remained their own. Their memories remained their own. But their emotions no longer belonged solely to themselves. Through the bond between their souls, they could feel each other's feelings as clearly as if those feelings had originated from their own hearts. Even the smallest emotions crossed naturally between them. Nothing was forced. Nothing could be hidden. If one of them worried, the other would feel it. If one of them felt lonely, the other would understand it instantly. And if one of them loved, the other could feel that love too. Neither had any idea why it was happening. And perhaps the most unfair part of all was that neither of them could truly lie anymore. Not because the bond allowed them to read thoughts. It didn't. But because emotions were far more honest than words. And Hector quickly discovered that this was both wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful because he no longer had to wonder whether Adrian was happy. Terrifying because Adrian had become alarmingly bold. And every time the prince looked at him with that beautiful smile, Hector would not only see the affection in Adrian's eyes, he would feel it blooming inside his own heart as well. One morning, Hector was reviewing reports when he suddenly felt something strange through the bond. Warmth, soft affection, followed by appreciation. Hector slowly raised his head. Adrian was sitting nearby, watching him, smiling. "What?" "Nothing." "No, tell me." Adrian's smile widened. "I was simply thinking that you have some attractive habits when you're concentrating." Hector stopped breathing. "Huh, what?" "That little frown between your eyebrows appears whenever you're annoyed by ministers. And your habit of running fingers through your hair out of frustration, make you look hot. Hector continued malfunctioning, hearing Adrian. Hector? Silence. Hector. Still silence. Adrian burst out laughing. You really are weak against compliments. Hearing them from you is unfair. Oh, really? Extremely unfair. Then perhaps I should compliment you more often. Please don't. I absolutely will. Unfortunately, things became significantly worse, because the ministers had resumed discussing marriage. Again, one old minister bowed. Your Majesty, the kingdom requires stability. Hector already disliked where this conversation was heading. Several noble houses had presented excellent candidates. The minister started, "Not of my concern." The answer came instantly. Across the room, invisible to everyone else, Adrian burst into laughter. The poor minister blinked. Your Majesty, perhaps meeting them. I shall not trouble myself with such matters. But your Majesty, still no, but your... Hector glared at the minister, not wanting to continue any further. The minister retreated in tears. Hector returned to his office, only to find Adrian sitting on his desk. You panicked, Adrian said, still laughing. Hector looked thoroughly offended. I exercise royal authority. Adrian nearly fell over laughing. My dear Hector, you practically declared war on those poor ministers. They started it. They just suggested meeting a few noble ladies. But you looked as though someone had personally insulted your ancestors. They deserved it. Adrian leaned forward, resting his chin in his hand, his sapphire eyes sparkling with amusement. Hector, what now? Hector asked, still sulking from Adrian's teasing from before, while they were discussing marriage candidates. His smile widened beautifully. You imagined me in wedding clothes, didn't you? Silence. Not because Hector had nothing to say, but because he had, in fact, imagined it several times, in disturbing detail. Adrian's smile slowly became victorious. Oh, dear. The prince sat up straighter. You really did. Hector stubbornly focused on the wall behind him. Unfortunately, Adrian had become far too familiar with his habits. My love, staring at the wall won't save you. It has protected me many times before. It failed today. Horribly. Hector sounded defeated. Adrian laughed softly. I suppose I should be honored. Then Adrian moved directly into Hector's line of sight, smiling like a cat that had just discovered a particularly amusing secret. So tell you what? Was it white? Hector slowly closed his eyes. Adrian. Perhaps blue? Adrian, please. Silver embroidery? Adrian, for the sake of my remaining dignity, please leave. Adrian laughed so hard his spiritual form flickered, which only made Hector bury his face in his hands and wonder, not for the first time, how the beloved crown prince of the kingdom had somehow become such a menace. Unfortunately, it was entirely his fault, and much to his eternal embarrassment, he loved every second of it. Unfortunately, Adrian's amusement disappeared 2 weeks later. Apparently, the ministers had interpreted Hector's constant refusals as shyness, and without consulting any further, arranged meetings with several foreign princesses. Adrian discovered the matter before Hector did, and for the first time since his return, Adrian became jealous. Painfully, childishly, and to Hector's endless amusement, rather adorably, their bond informed Hector long before anyone else could. By evening, every flower arrangement in his office had mysteriously become yellow roses, Adrian's favorite flowers. Portraits of eligible noble women had vanished. A marriage proposal document had somehow found its way into the palace pond, and one unfortunate minister spent the entire day being chased by furious flower fairies. Hector eventually found Adrian sitting beside the fountain with his arms crossed. You were responsible for this. Adrian looked offended. I have no idea what you mean. Spirits are innocent creatures. The flower fairies are carrying protest signs, Adrian. Adrian froze. Unfortunately, the signs read, Stop trying to steal our Adrian's husband. Hector nearly choked reading that. You're what? Adrian's ears immediately turned red. The fairies scattered in terror. Adrian coughed awkwardly. I may have been slightly upset. Slightly? My love, you practically declared war. They started it. Hector stared at him for a moment. Then he laughed. Because apparently the kingdom's beloved crown prince had decided that jealousy should be expressed through sabotage and tiny flying revolutionaries. Adrian pouted. You are enjoying this far too much. I'm trying not to. But the amusement slowly faded from Adrian's face. His sapphire eyes lowered slightly. Hector, his voice had become softer. I know I'm being unreasonable. Hector's smile disappeared. But I have never been selfish before. Adrian laughed quietly, though there was something vulnerable hidden beneath it. All my life, I was taught to think of the kingdom before myself. Even after death, when I became nothing more than a wandering spirit, I never wished for anything. He looked away, the moonlight falling gently over his silver hair. And then I met you. His voice became quieter. And now, even though I cannot touch you, even though I don't know if the situation will ever change, and even though I don't know what the future holds. He smiled helplessly. I don't want to see you with anyone else. Hector froze. Adrian laughed softly at his own embarrassment. It surprises me, too. You are the first person who has made me feel something so possessive. The first person I have ever wanted entirely for myself. His cheeks turned red. I know it's selfish. I know it isn't very kingly. But when I imagine someone else standing beside you, he sighed. I dislike it. Very much. Then, with a smile both shy and beautiful, he looked back at Hector. So yes, I was jealous. Terribly jealous. And if those ministers insist on introducing princesses to you again, I cannot guarantee the safety of their flower gardens. Hector simply stared at him, not because he found the confession amusing, not because he found it embarrassing, but because, for perhaps the first time in his life, Adrian had chosen himself, chosen his own happiness, chosen Hector. Slowly, Hector approached him. My love, his voice was soft. After crossing worlds to find you, do you truly think I would allow anyone else to stand beside me? Adrian's eyes widened slightly, and for the record, Hector smiled. I find your selfishness absolutely adorable. Adrian's ears immediately turned red. Hector, yes. I am trying to have a heartfelt conversation, and I am having one. Hector, yes, my love. Adrian looked away in defeat. You are unfair. Hector chuckled softly. No, Adrian, you are simply precious. Adrian smiled helplessly. Then his sapphire eyes narrowed with renewed determination. And another thing, I may only be a spirit right now, but I still possess my magic. So, I suggest you conduct yourself accordingly, Your Majesty. Hector nearly choked. Was that a threat? Adrian smiled sweetly. It was a warning. My love, you are terrifying. And yet you adore me. Unfortunately. Fortunately, Adrian corrected cheerfully. And Hector, much to his eternal embarrassment, found himself unable to disagree. The worst incident happened 3 days later. Having finally escaped ministers, politics, and endless paperwork, Hector sank into the giant royal bath with a sigh of relief. Steam drifted softly through the marble chamber, and for the first time in days, peace embraced him. Then, a familiar voice ruined everything. Well, hello there. I had wondered where my king had disappeared to, and it seems you are certainly enjoying your evening all by yourself. I hope I'm not interrupting you. Hector opened his eyes, and nearly drowned. Adrian was floating lazily above the water, lying on his side with his head resting on one hand, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. Hector immediately grabbed a towel. Adrian, have you lost your mind? Get out. Adrian blinked innocently. Whatever for, I was beginning to worry that you were trying to negotiate with exhaustion again. My love, I am naked. Adrian smiled mischievously. Hector, that is my body. I spent 20 years living in it. There is hardly anything here I haven't already seen. Hector turned scarlet. Well, it is my body right now. Our body, Adrian corrected with terrible satisfaction. Hector, relax. I simply wanted to keep you company. You are impossible, and you are adorable when embarrassed. Please leave. No. Adrian, my love, have mercy. Adrian laughed softly before his smile gradually gentled. I spent 3 years, unable to touch anything, Hector. Allow me to enjoy the sight of you being healthy and alive. Hector froze, then immediately felt guilty. I'm sorry. Adrian burst out laughing. You apologizing while half submerged and clutching a towel for dear life is a sight I shall treasure forever. You are such a horrible man, Adrian. Adrian's smile became warm and affectionate. Hector's ears reddened once more, and looking at Adrian smiling so beautifully beneath the drifting steam, he suddenly found himself unable to complain. For a brief moment, the whole world grew quiet, and Hector thought, not for the first time, that peace looked remarkably like one silver-haired prince floating shamelessly above a bathtub. 3 months later, beneath a forgotten mountain untouched by history itself, Hector and Adrian finally found the answer they had been seeking. Among ancient records and crystal archives left behind by civilizations long vanished, they discovered the truth behind a miracle that had brought them together. The phenomenon was known as the soul resonance event. Ancient scholars described it as something far rarer than destiny and far older than prophecy. It was not a blessing bestowed upon chosen heroes, or the tale of lovers fated by the heavens. Rather, it was the existence of 2 souls born beneath different skies and in different worlds, yet belonging to the same spiritual constellation. Such souls would recognize one another across realities, and no matter how impossible the distance, their existence itself would seek reunion. Only then did everything make sense. Why Hector had entered Adrian's body, why Adrian's soul had survived, why neither of them had been destroyed, why their emotions crossed through the bond connecting them, and why love itself had slowly rebuilt the bridge between their separated souls. After a long silence, Adrian looked toward Hector and smiled. Hector smiled back. Adrian's eyes curved with amusement. So, you literally loved me back into existence. Hector immediately looked away, while Adrian burst into helpless laughter. Yet their search did not end there. For 6 months they wandered through forgotten ruins and ancient sanctuaries, until deep beneath the remains of a nameless civilization, they found a cracked crystal tablet that changed everything once more. According to the records, when a soul crossed worlds unnaturally, its original body did not always perish. In exceedingly rare cases, the body entered a state of suspended existence and drifted into a dimension known as the Boundary Sea, a silent realm between realities where abandoned vessels neither lived nor died, waiting endlessly beyond the reach of time. Hector reread the tablet several times. His body, his original body, it might still exist. Before he could even process the revelation, Adrian smiled gently. So we can bring you back. Hector froze. As always, Adrian's first thought had been Hector. My love, shouldn't you be thinking about yourself? He asked quietly. Adrian tilted his head. I am. My future includes you. Hector, why are you always surprised by that? The words were spoken so naturally that Hector immediately found a crack in the wall infinitely fascinating. Unfortunately, Adrian had become an expert at recognizing his beloved's embarrassment. Further records spoke of the grand convergence, the final stage of the soul resonance event. It was a miracle requiring perfect understanding, complete acceptance, and a bond strengthened not by magic alone, but by love itself. After reading that page, Hector closed the book immediately. Adrian's smile became thoroughly dangerous. Hector, did you just skip the page where the universe officially approved our relationship? Horrible man, Hector murmured. Adrian laughed softly. And yet you love me. His smile gentled. Months later, beneath a sky overflowing with stars, Hector and Adrian stood upon the sky altar, the highest peak on the continent. Ancient runes spread across the mountain like rivers of silver light, while thousands of dormant magic circles awakened one after another, illuminating the heavens themselves. It was as though the world had held its breath for countless ages, waiting for this very moment. And for the first time in thousands of years, the ritual answered. Not gods, not fate, not divine beings, but something far older and infinitely gentler, the soul resonance. The miracle that had refused to let Adrian disappear. The miracle that had crossed worlds to bring Hector to him. Light consumed everything. The mountain vanished. The heavens dissolved. Reality itself faded away until only Hector and Adrian remained, standing together within an endless sea of stars. And there, for the first time they saw it, a brilliant silver thread stretched between their souls. Ancient, beautiful, unbreakable. It shimmered like a constellation woven into existence itself, as though it had existed long before either of them had been born, and would continue long after stars themselves had faded. Then another figure appeared beyond countless worlds. A young man with black hair and sharp gray eyes. Hector Carmine, his original body, untouched by time, preserved within the boundary sea, waiting patiently beyond the reach of death. Yet, as Hector looked upon the face he had believed lost forever, he felt no overwhelming attachment, because somewhere along the way, home had ceased to be a body. Home had become the man standing beside him. As though sensing those thoughts, Adrian reached toward him. Their fingers could not touch, and yet warmth flowed between them all the same. "Hector," Adrian said softly, his sapphire eyes filled with affection, "if I must choose between returning to my body and bringing you home, then I refuse to choose. I want both." Hector laughed quietly. "Greedy prince." Adrian smiled proudly. "I learned from you." As the ritual reached its climax, ancient power surged through the sea of stars. The silver thread divided into two streams of light, one reaching toward Adrian's body and the other toward Hector's. Reality trembled, worlds overlapped, and then darkness. When Hector opened his eyes again, he felt a heartbeat, his own heartbeat, warm blood, breath, life. Slowly, he raised his hand and watched black hair fall before his eyes. Hector Carmine had returned, but before he could marvel at himself, he turned immediately. Several steps away, another figure stirred. Silver hair, long lashes, bright sapphire eyes slowly opening. Adrian, alive, breathing, human. For years they had seen each other through mirrors, dreams, memories, and impossible miracles. Now, at last, there was nothing between them. No distance, no barriers, no loneliness, only reality. Hector had spent years preparing speeches, confessions, and declarations. Yet now, standing before the person he had crossed worlds to find, his mind was completely empty. Adrian tilted his head, amusement dancing in his eyes. "For someone who spent years preparing speeches, my dear Hector, you are remarkably disappointing." Hector blinked helplessly. "I forgot every single one." Adrian tried very hard to remain serious for exactly 3 seconds. Then he burst into laughter. The same laughter Hector had treasured through dreams and crystal recordings. Only now it was real and infinitely more precious. Still smiling, Adrian stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Hector, burying his face against his chest with a contented sigh. "I missed you." Those simple words nearly shattered Hector's composure. Adrian looked up, his cheeks slightly flushed and his smile gentle. "I know how long you waited. I know how deeply you love me. And I know you crossed worlds for me. But after watching you all those years, I realized something." His forehead rested lightly against Hector's. "I do not want a hero or a king. I simply want Hector. And I have wanted him for a very long time." And for the first time in his life, the king of the underworld, the man who had destroyed empires and feared nothing, stood with tears in his eyes, because after crossing worlds, defying death, and enduring loneliness itself, he had finally found a person his soul had always been searching for. And this time, neither of them would ever let go. Chapter 14. The days they had always dreamed of. Adrian rested his forehead lightly against Hector's. A soft laugh escaped him. "You know." Hector smiled gently. "What is it, my love?" Adrian's eyes curved with amusement. "You still owe me those speeches." Hector closed his eyes and groaned quietly. "Good heavens! Even after crossing worlds and rewriting fate, I'm still not free from that." Adrian laughed. "Certainly not. I waited years for them, and I spent years preparing them." His sapphire eyes sparkled. "And—" Hector gently took Adrian's hand, holding it with a reverence that made Adrian's heart ache. And every single one of them started the same way. "My love, for once, Prince Adrian Aurelius, who had always possessed a clever answer for everything, found himself speechless. His ears turned slightly red. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. After everything they had endured, words felt far too small to contain the distance they had crossed to reach this moment. With trembling fingers, Hector brushed a few silver strands away from Adrian's face. The simple touch nearly unraveled him. For years, Adrian had existed as a dream, a memory, a voice trapped inside a crystal. Now he stood before him, warm and real. Adrian smiled, not the smile preserved in memories. A real smile, one meant only for him. And somehow, that made Hector's chest ache more than anything else. Neither knew who leaned forward first, only that suddenly there was no distance left between them. Their first kiss was gentle, a quiet miracle, soft with gratitude, relief, and the overwhelming joy of finally touching the person they had crossed worlds to find. When they parted, neither stepped away, foreheads resting together. They shared the same breath, the same silence, the same fragile wonder. And in that silence, years flashed through their minds. The hidden garden, the dreams, the recording crystal, the endless waiting, the countless moments they had reached for one another and found only emptiness. But there was no emptiness now. Adrian's fingers tightened around Hector's hand, and suddenly the truth settled into both their hearts. No world separated them. No miracle was keeping them apart. The person they had searched for was finally within reach. Something in Adrian's expression darkened. The playful prince vanished, leaving behind only the man who had waited just as long. His hand rose to cup Hector's cheek, and that single touch shattered whatever restraint remained between them. Years of longing, yearning, and devotion flowed silently between them, needing no words. Hector leaned into the warmth of his palm. Adrian smiled, and together they closed the distance once more. This time there was no uncertainty, only the quiet certainty and passion of two souls who had finally found their way home. The stars shone above them. The wind whispered through the grass. And for those precious moments, the world seemed to fade away. There was only Adrian, only Hector, only the profound peace of knowing they would never have to search for each other again. When they finally pulled apart, breathing heavily, neither could stop smiling. A soft laugh escaped Adrian, the same laughter Hector had treasured through dreams and memories. Only now it was real, and infinitely more precious. Later that night, beneath a sky filled with stars, they fell asleep in each other's arms. Not because they feared the other might disappear, but because after crossing worlds, defying death, and enduring years of loneliness, simply being together felt like the greatest miracle of all. The following days, getting used to each other's physical presence turned out to be surprisingly difficult. Not because they disliked it. Quite the opposite. They enjoyed it far too much. Adrian often caught Hector staring at him. Hector, yes, my love. You are staring. I know. Do you require assistance? Not really. Then why are you staring? Hector smiled helplessly. Because I spent years imagining you, and reality was unfair enough to exceed my imagination. Adrian's ears immediately turned red. Terrible man. And yet I love him. The kingdom's reaction to Hector Carmine proved interesting. Officially, he had been introduced as a mysterious scholar and strategist who had aided King Adrian for years. Unofficially, everyone quickly understood, because King Adrian smiled too much around him. Far too much. Ministers began noticing strange things. His Majesty always looked happier when Lord Hector was nearby. His Majesty always insisted on eating meals with Lord Hector. And if Lord Hector disappeared for more than 3 hours, His Majesty would mysteriously begin searching the palace. One elderly minister finally sighed. I served 3 generations of royalty. Another minister nodded. And I have never seen His Majesty smile like that. Across the hall, Adrian was happily feeding Hector dessert. The old ministers exchanged glances. Understanding dawned. And with remarkable wisdom born from age and self-preservation, they unanimously decided not to interfere. One afternoon, Hector buried himself beneath mountains of documents. Adrian stared, and stared, and continued staring. Finally, he stood up, walked over, and trapped Hector between himself and the wall. Hector froze. Adrian. Yes. You are the king. I am aware. Shouldn't you be the busy one? I finished my work. And my beloved seems determined to work himself to death. Hector blinked. Adrian leaned closer. Do you know how offensive that is? Offensive? Very. You ignored me for 4 hours. I was working. So was I. Adrian smiled sweetly. And yet I found time to miss you. Hector turned red immediately. My love. Adrian's voice softened. I waited 3 years to hold you. I refused to compete with paperwork. Hector laughed helplessly. Jealous of reports now? I am perfectly capable of becoming jealous of papers. That is absurd. And yet here we are. Adrian's smile became brighter. Fortunately, I possess an unfair advantage. What advantage? You, of course. Then, with all the elegance expected of a king and none of the dignity expected of royalty, Adrian stole a kiss. Hector stared, flustered, speechless. Adrian smiled proudly. You know, watching you blush might be one of my favorite hobbies. You are hopelessly spoiled. By whom? Hector's expression softened. His hand gently touched Adrian's cheek. By me, unfortunately. Adrian leaned into his touch and smiled with such happiness that Hector quietly decided if the heavens themselves demanded Adrian's tears in exchange for peace, then the heavens would simply have to burn, because he had crossed worlds for this smile. And now that it belonged to him, he intended to spend the rest of eternity protecting it. Chapter 15. The life they fought for. In the years that followed, the continent gradually came to understand a truth no one had anticipated. The golden age of the kingdom belonged to King Adrian Aurelius. His kindness transformed lives. His wisdom brought prosperity. His compassion earned the unwavering love of his people. Yet, those who knew him well understood something equally important. The gentle and benevolent king who forgave easily, smiled warmly, and devoted himself tirelessly to his people, possessed one astonishing weakness. Hector Carmine, standing beside Adrian, was a man kings feared, the strategist who had dismantled empires, outplayed rulers, and reshaped the continent with little more than patience and terrifying intelligence. Entire nations had learned that if Adrian desired something, Hector would move heaven and earth to place it in his hands. What astonished people even more was that the same man who could make kingdoms bow willingly submitted himself to Adrian, not from obligation, not from weakness, but from love. And Adrian was no better. At first, everyone believed Hector alone was hopelessly devoted. Then they witnessed the other side of their king, a side no one had ever seen before, not even Adrian himself, because before Hector entered his life, Adrian had never wanted anything for himself, never demanded, possessed, or placed his own happiness above another's. Then Hector happened, and suddenly the kingdom discovered that their beloved king could become surprisingly terrifying. When a foreign diplomat implied that Hector's opinion regarding their diplomatic agreement is not welcomed, Adrian responded with such chilling courtesy that the diplomat later confessed he would rather negotiate with Hector. Even Hector had been caught off guard. One unfortunate duke had publicly implied that Hector held too much influence over the throne. The court had fallen silent, not because of the accusation, but because Adrian had smiled, a calm, gentle smile, the same smile that usually reassured frightened children and nervous citizens. Yet somehow, every noble in the room immediately sensed danger. The Duke never finished his sentence. Within a week, every investigation into corruption, embezzlement, and abuse of authority connected to his house had mysteriously resurfaced. Within a month, his political allies had abandoned him. Within 3 months, he voluntarily retired from public life. The entire process had been perfectly legal, perfectly justified, and utterly ruthless. When Hector eventually discovered what had happened, he found Adrian reading quietly in the study chamber. My love. Adrian looked up from his book. Yes. Did you dismantle an entire noble house because they insulted me? Adrian considered the question, then calmly turned a page. They should have chosen a wiser target. Hector stared. Adrian continued reading. As king, I cannot punish people for disliking me. His sapphire eyes finally lifted. But I see no reason to be generous toward those who disrespect you. For a moment, Hector said nothing, because the Adrian he knew from memories would have simply endured the insult. This Adrian had smiled and destroyed the man's future. The realization was both alarming and strangely endearing. Adrian seemed completely unbothered. They were fortunate. Fortunate? They only insulted you. Hector nearly laughed. My love. Yes. You are becoming terrifying. Adrian's smile immediately softened. Only where you are concerned. And somehow, that answer was far more dangerous than any threat. Eventually, the palace servant stopped pretending not to notice. At first, Hector merely stayed late at Adrian's chamber. Then 2 cups of tea appeared every morning. Then 2 pillows, 2 wardrobes, until one day, the head maid quietly announced to servants, "Please stop moving Lord Hector's clothes back to his old room." Everyone froze, then celebrated quietly. Meanwhile, Secretary William merely stared at the heavens and said, "I give up." No one knew what he had given up, but everyone agreed he deserved peace. For Adrian, however, life itself had become a miracle. After years as a wandering soul, simple things brought him happiness. The warmth of sunlight, the smell of rain, the softness of flower petals, the taste of strawberry tarts. One morning, Hector woke to find Adrian sitting by the window. Sunlight bathed his silver hair. His hand rested inside the stream of golden light entering through the curtains. "Hector." "Yes, my love." "The sun is warm," Adrian said with a soft smile. Hector felt his chest tighten, because something so simple, something people overlooked every day, had once been impossible for Adrian, and now he smiled over something as ordinary as sunlight. Hector walked over and wrapped his arms around him from behind. Adrian leaned back immediately. "Hector, my dear, is something on your mind?" "Nothing." His voice softened. "I simply wanted to hold you." And Adrian smiled, that beautiful smile Hector always cherished. Their happiest memories often came from ordinary days. One spring festival, Adrian mysteriously declared that Hector was forbidden from asking questions. "Hector, just trust me." "That sentence has never brought me peace," Hector complained. Adrian laughed. Thus, King Adrian disguised himself, dragged Hector through crowded streets, bought sweets, played games, watched fireworks. Beneath countless lanterns drifting across the river, Adrian suddenly took Hector's hand and pulled him toward the music. "Dance with me?" Hector blinked. "My love, what exactly are we doing?" Adrian's sapphire eyes sparkled with amusement. "We are on a date, obviously." Hector nearly stumbled. "A date?" "Of course." Adrian stepped closer, completely unashamed. "You crossed world for me, fought kingdoms for me, and somehow forgot the simple part." "The simple part?" Hector asked, confused. "Courtship." Hector stared. Adrian smiled beautifully. "So I decided to court you myself." For perhaps the 100th time in his life, Hector found himself completely defeated. And beneath a sky full of lanterns and stars, they danced. Not as king and strategist, not as legends remembered by history, simply as Adrian and Hector. A month later, Hector disappeared for an entire day. When he returned, he led Adrian into the hidden garden, the garden where everything had begun. Beneath blooming wisteria trees, Hector took out 2 rings. Simple, elegant, beautiful. Adrian stared. Hector smiled shyly. "In my world, couples exchange rings." He looked almost embarrassed. "So I thought," his voice softened, "perhaps we could too." Adrian's eyes became moist. "I have prepared speeches again." Adrian burst out laughing. "Of course you did." Hector gently held his hand. "My love, I crossed world because of you. I found peace because of you. And if I am fortunate enough, I wish to spend every tomorrow with you." Adrian was already crying. "Hector." "Yes." "My answer was yes before you even started." They exchanged rings beneath the flowers, and the fairies celebrated louder than anyone. Their peaceful life was not without excitement. One afternoon, during sword practice, Hector stepped awkwardly on uneven stone and twisted his ankle. It was barely serious, but Adrian witnessed it and immediately forgot dignity. Hector, before anyone understood what happened, the king had already rushed over. "Hector, are you hurt?" "My love, it is only—" "No." And before Hector could protest, Adrian lifted him into his arms, in front of everyone. Generals, knights, servants, everyone. Hector buried his face in his hands. "Adrian, my dignity. It will survive my reputation. It is overrated." And so, the king carried Lord Hector all the way to their chamber. The entire palace watched in stunned silence. Inside the chamber, Adrian gently placed Hector upon the sofa. Then, to Hector's horror, the king of an entire nation knelt before him. "My love, honestly, this is excessive." Adrian ignored him, carefully lifting Hector's foot into his lap. He cast healing magic with utmost concentration. "Adrian, it is merely a sprain." Adrian's worried gaze met Hector's. Adrian again looked at Hector's now healed ankle. His voice became quiet. "Hector, perhaps you endured worse pain before I met you." His fingers trembled slightly. "And perhaps there were days you suffered alone." His sapphire eyes lifted. But going forward, his smile was warm. "I intend to cherish you as the most precious thing in this world." Hector stared and lost the argument immediately. As always, epilogue. Across all worlds. Years passed, then decades, and somehow, despite everything they had experienced, Adrian still found new ways to make Hector suffer, mostly through embarrassment. And Hector, despite being feared by kings and remembered in history as a man who had brought an entire continent to heal, still found himself utterly defenseless against one smiling silver-haired man. Nothing changed, and yet everything did. The kingdom flourished. The scars of war faded, leaving behind an age historians would later call the Golden Age, the age of King Adrian Aurelius. Though anyone who knew the truth understood that no history book could ever separate those years from the name Hector Carmine, because wherever Adrian stood, Hector was there, and wherever Hector walked, Adrian followed. They had become so naturally intertwined that people no longer thought of them separately. Not the king and his advisor, not the king and his consort, not the hero and the tactician, simply as Adrian and Hector, as they had always been. One spring afternoon, many years later, the hidden garden remained as beautiful as ever. The same flowers, the same wisteria trees, the same little fairies. And in the middle of the garden sat two men, older now, but no less beautiful in each other's eyes. Adrian rested comfortably against Hector's shoulder, and Hector, as always, held him close. Silence existed between them, not because they had run out of words, but because they had spent a lifetime learning that love did not always require speaking. Then suddenly, Adrian looked up. "Hector." "Yes, my love." "I noticed something." Hector smiled. "And what has your majesty discovered today?" Adrian's sapphire eyes curved with amusement. "It's just that—" He laughed softly. "You once said that if you ever got to meet me, you would call me every endearing name in existence." Hector froze, because, unfortunately, Adrian remembered everything. Everything, including certain embarrassing monologues spoken to mirrors. The tips of Hector's ears slowly became red. Adrian looked terribly pleased. "But these days you mostly call me Adrian." Hector looked away immediately. The flowers became fascinating. A butterfly became fascinating. Anything but Adrian. Unfortunately, Adrian had spent a lifetime learning how to deal with him. He moved closer, resting his chin upon Hector's shoulder. "And here I thought I had a very romantic husband." "My love," Hector started. "No, not that." Adrian laughed. "I distinctly remember someone saying 'my darling,' 'my heart,' and a great many other things, while suffering dramatically in front of a mirror." Hector closed his eyes. "Must you remember everything?" "Absolutely." Adrian's smile softened. because they were all precious to me. Slowly, Hector turned toward him, and there was Adrian, still smiling beautifully, still looking at him, as though Hector was the greatest miracle in his life. And after all these years, Hector still lost. Completely, his hand gently caressed Adrian's cheek. "My love." Adrian smiled. "My heart." Adrian's smile widened. "My darling." The silver-haired king laughed softly. "My sweetheart." Adrian's eyes became misty. "And the most precious treasure this universe has ever given me." Adrian buried his face against Hector's shoulder, and Hector simply held him, as he always had, as he always would. When the evening came, they danced slowly beneath the stars, just the two of them, as they had done countless times. Older hands intertwined, gentle smiles, and eyes that still held the same love they had possessed from the beginning, perhaps more. As they danced beneath the moonlight, Adrian smiled suddenly. "I still think I fell in love first." Hector snorted. "Says the man who watched me suffer in front of a mirror and did nothing." Adrian's laughter rang through the night. "Oh, I enjoyed every second of it." "Horrible man." Adrian's eyes softened. "You're a horrible man." And Hector, as always, lost the argument. And perhaps that was how their story was always meant to end. Not with battles, not with legends, not with sorrow, but with laughter. Because long before Hector understood it, long before Adrian understood it, their souls had already known. Adrian's soul called, and Hector's soul answered. Two souls that recognize one another beyond worlds, beyond lifetimes, beyond existence itself. Whenever Adrian reached out, Hector would come for him. Whenever Hector was lost, Adrian would find him, not because destiny demanded it, but because it was Adrian, and because it was Hector. Among countless stars and endless worlds, they would always choose each other. And perhaps, somewhere far beyond mortal understanding, the universe smiled, because after crossing worlds, defying death and rewriting miracles, those two souls had finally found their way home, to each other, and they lived happily, not just in this lifetime, but in every lifetime the stars had yet to dream.
And so, our journey with Adrian and Hector comes to an end. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing this story with me. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you won't miss future stories. And share this story with someone who might enjoy this too. Your support truly means more than you know and helps me continue bringing new worlds and unforgettable characters to life. Until our next adventure, take care, stay safe, and thank you for listening.